I never thought I'd be sitting here writing this, trying to make sense of how everything fell apart so completely. 6 months ago, I was a respected marketing coordinator, a devoted mother, and what I believed was a neglected wife trying to save her marriage. Today, I'm facing divorce papers that paint me as something I never thought I was. A manipulator, a liar, someone who destroyed her own family while believing she was the victim. Ray served those papers at my 32nd birthday party in front of everyone we knew, our friends, our families, our children, all watching as he calmly handed me legal documents and played a recording of me joking about my body count to a table full of people who were supposed to be on my side. The laughter died instantly. The room went silent except for the sound of my own voice coming through his phone speaker, making jokes about needing a calculator while my husband walked out of that restaurant months earlier. I want to explain how I got there, how a woman who genuinely believed she was fighting for her happiness and her marriage became someone who could make those kinds of jokes while her husband worked 60-hour weeks to provide for our family. I want to explain the loneliness, the feeling of being invisible in my own home, the way Ray would come home exhausted and barely acknowledge me or the children. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The truth is, I spent months building a story about my life that justified everything I did. I convinced myself, my sister, my best friend, even our pastor, that I was a woman pushed to her breaking point by an emotionally absent husband. I documented every forgotten anniversary, every missed dinner, every time he chose work over family. I shared these stories widely, carefully crafting an image of myself as someone who deserved better, someone who was trying so hard to save something that was already broken. What I didn't know was that Ray was documenting everything too. While I was gathering evidence of his failures as a husband, he was quietly recording my lies, tracking my spending, noting my absences. While I was building my narrative of neglect and emotional abandonment, he was building a legal case that would expose every manipulation, every half-truth, every way I used our children and our friends to justify what I was doing. The person in those recordings, the woman who could laugh about betraying her marriage while her husband stood there listening. I don't know how I became her, but I did, and now I have to live with what that transformation cost me, cost our children, cost everyone who believed in the story. I told about who I was and what I needed. This is how it happened. This is how I lost everything while believing I was fighting to save it. Looking back, I can see how everything started with what felt like legitimate complaints. Ray had been working insane hours on some major software project for months, leaving the house before the kids woke up and coming home after they were already in bed. When he was home, he seemed completely drained, barely managing conversations beyond asking about bills or scheduling. I felt like I was raising Emma and James alone while living with a roommate who happened to share our bank account. The loneliness was crushing. I'd try to talk to him about my day, about the kids' activities, about anything that mattered to me, and he'd nod while scrolling through his phone or checking emails. When Emma had her school play, I sat in that auditorium surrounded by other families, watching my daughter scan the audience for her father, who was stuck at the office handling some crisis. The empty seat next to me felt like a statement about our entire marriage. I started venting to my sister Sarah during our weekly coffee dates. She listened to every frustration, every example of Ray prioritizing work over family. Every night I went to bed feeling completely alone, despite sharing it with my husband. Sarah kept saying I needed to focus on myself, that I couldn't pour from an empty cup, that I deserved to feel valued and appreciated. She suggested I find something that made me feel good about myself again. That's how I ended up at Fit Life Gym. I told myself it was about getting healthy, feeling confident, having something that was just for me. The membership wasn't cheap, but I justified it as necessary self-care. Ray barely noticed when I mentioned joining, just mumbled something about the budget while typing on his laptop. Even my attempt to invest in myself didn't warrant his full attention. Devon was my assigned personal trainer during the complimentary session that came with membership. He was everything Ray wasn't in those moments. Present, focused, interested in what I had to say. When I mentioned being married with kids, he actually asked follow-up questions about my family, remembered details from our conversations, complimented the progress I was making. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in months. The training sessions became the highlight of my week. Devon would ask how I was doing, really listen to my answers, notice when I seemed stressed or tired. He'd adjust our workouts based on my energy levels, celebrate small victories, make me laugh during particularly difficult exercises. When I mentioned Ray missing Emma's play, Devon shook his head and said any man would be lucky to have a dedicated mother like me supporting him. I started scheduling longer gym sessions, staying to chat with Devon after workouts, looking forward to our conversations more than anything happening at home. Ray would ask why I was gone so long, and I'd explain that fitness was a process, that building healthy habits took time and consistency. He'd shrug and return to his computer, apparently satisfied with my explanation. The kids noticed my improved mood immediately. Emma commented that I seemed happier, that I was laughing more and didn't seem as tired all the time. James started asking if he could come to the gym with me, curious about this place that made Mommy so cheerful. Even Sarah remarked that I had more energy during our conversations, that focusing on myself was clearly the right decision. When Ray finally noticed my new workout clothes and asked about the expensive gym gear, I felt defensive rather than guilty. Here I was, finally doing something positive for myself, and his first concern was money rather than supporting my efforts to feel better. I told him that investing in proper equipment was important for preventing injury, that I was worth the expense of good athletic wear. He dropped the subject, but something in his expression seemed different, more attentive than usual. Devon suggested we try some sessions at his apartment, explaining that his home gym had specialized equipment that could take my training to the next level. The gym could get crowded and noisy, he said, making it hard to focus on proper form and technique. At his place, we could work without distractions, really concentrate on my goals. It seemed reasonable, professional, just another step in my fitness journey. The first time I drove to Devon's apartment, I told myself it was still just training, just another way to prioritize my health and well-being while my husband prioritized everything except his family. Devon's apartment was nothing like the gym. Quieter, more intimate, with equipment arranged in his living room and soft music playing in the background. He'd prepared protein smoothies for after our workout, asked about my week while we stretched, created an atmosphere that felt more like spending time with a friend than a training session. For the first time in months, I felt completely relaxed and appreciated. The conversations during those private sessions went deeper than our gym talks. Devon asked about my marriage directly, listened without judgment when I explained how isolated I felt, how Ray treated me more like a housekeeper than a partner. He'd shake his head sympathetically, mention that he couldn't understand how any man would take someone like me for granted. These weren't inappropriate comments, just honest observations from someone who actually saw me as a person worth attention. When things shifted from training to something more personal, it felt natural rather than shocking. Devon had been the one person who consistently made me feel valued, attractive, interesting. The physical connection followed months of emotional connection that I wasn't getting at home. I told myself I wasn't hurting anyone. Ray barely seemed to notice whether I was home or not, and what he didn't know wouldn't damage him. I was simply getting my needs met elsewhere while he focused on his career. The guilt I expected never really materialized. Instead, I felt more energized, more confident, more like the person I used to be before marriage and motherhood consumed my identity. Devon appreciated things about me that Ray had stopped noticing years ago. He complimented my appearance, my intelligence, my sense of humor. He made me feel desirable in ways that had nothing to do with domestic responsibilities or child-rearing duties. Ray did start asking questions about my extended gym sessions. Why was I gone for 3 hours? Who was I training with? Why did I need so many new workout outfits? His questions felt suspicious and controlling rather than caring. I responded by pointing out his own absence from family life, his lack of interest in my daily activities, his failure to support my efforts towards self-improvement. If he was going to be jealous of the time I spent on fitness, maybe he should examine why he never showed the same investment in our relationship. I started sharing more details about my marriage struggles with my friend Michelle during our regular coffee dates. She listened to my complaints about Ray's emotional unavailability, his workaholic tendencies, his apparent indifference to my needs as a woman and partner. Michelle validated my feelings completely, suggesting that maybe separation would force Ray to recognize what he was losing. She said I deserved someone who prioritized me, who made me feel special, who understood that marriage required effort from both people. The conversations with Michelle helped me articulate what was wrong with my marriage in ways that felt justified and reasonable. Ray wasn't abusive in obvious ways, but emotional neglect was still harmful. He wasn't cheating with another woman, but he was certainly having an affair with his work. I was simply responding to his abandonment by finding emotional fulfillment elsewhere. Anyone in my situation would understand the choices I was making. Sarah continued supporting my gym routine and new confidence, though she started asking more specific questions about my training schedule and whether I was being careful about boundaries with my trainer. I assured her that Devon was completely professional, that our relationship was purely about fitness goals, that she was reading too much into my improved mood. The fact that I felt happier was proof that focusing on myself had been the right decision all along. I began documenting Ray's failures more systematically, taking photos of dishes he'd left in the sink, noting dates when he'd missed family dinners, for work calls, keeping track of his promises to spend more time with the kids that never materialized. These weren't petty complaints, but legitimate concerns about a husband who had checked out of our marriage emotionally. If anyone questioned my choices later, I'd have evidence of what I'd been dealing with at home. When Ray found a restaurant receipt for a lunch I'd shared with Devon, something I'd told him was a work meeting, his reaction proved everything I'd been, thinking about his priorities. Instead of asking if I was okay, or why I might need emotional support outside our marriage, he immediately became suspicious and accusatory. He wanted explanations and details, rather than examining why his wife might be seeking connection elsewhere. The confrontation about the receipt felt like a turning point, though not in the direction I'd expected. Ray's discovery of the restaurant receipt triggered something defensive in me that surprised even myself. Instead of explaining or apologizing, I accused him of monitoring my spending like some kind of financial dictator. I pointed out that he'd never questioned his own expensive work lunches or client dinners, so why was my occasional meal out suddenly suspicious? His reaction, calm questions instead of anger, only frustrated me more. I wanted him to fight for our marriage, not investigate it like a detective. I decided our friends needed to understand what I'd been dealing with at home. During our regular group dinner at the Brass Monkey, I laid out Ray's failures as a husband and father. Michelle, Sarah, and our other friends listened sympathetically as I described his emotional absence, his work obsession, his apparent indifference to my needs. They nodded knowingly when I mentioned feeling more like a single parent than a married woman. The conversation grew more animated as the wine flowed. Someone joked about my dramatic transformation since joining the gym, how much happier and more confident I seemed. Another friend mentioned that I was practically glowing lately, asking what my secret was. The attention felt intoxicating after months of feeling invisible at home. When they pressed for details about my newfound confidence, I made the comment that would haunt me later, something about needing a calculator for my body count, delivered with a laugh that made everyone at the table giggle. Ray appeared at our table. Just as the laughter died down, he'd come to surprise me, to try making an effort after our fight about the receipt. The look on his face when he realized what he'd walked into was something I'd never seen before. Not anger or hurt, but a kind of cold calculation that should have terrified me. He turned and left without saying a word, and I told our friends this was exactly the kind of dramatic behavior I'd been describing. Pastor Kim's counseling sessions became another platform for documenting Ray's failures. I detailed his emotional unavailability, his refusal to prioritize our marriage, his apparent inability to meet my needs as a woman. The pastor listened carefully, took notes, asked thoughtful questions about our relationship dynamics. When he suggested individual sessions to better understand each of our perspectives, I agreed immediately, confident that any objective observer would see how hard I'd been trying to save our marriage. What I didn't realize was that Pastor Kim was documenting everything too, including the contradictions in my story and the changes in my behavior that didn't align with someone desperately trying to repair her marriage. The whispers started at work first. My colleague Janet mentioned seeing me at that coffee shop near the gym during lunch hours, always with the same attractive younger man. She asked casually if I'd made a new friend, noting how animated and happy I looked during those meetings. I explained that Devon was my personal trainer, that we sometimes discussed nutrition and workout plans over coffee, that having professional support was part of my health journey. Janet nodded, but something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Linda, Ray's mother, began visiting more frequently, always arriving unannounced with gifts for the kids or offers to help with household tasks. She'd observe our family dynamics with sharp eyes, commenting on my new clothes and frequent absences, asking pointed questions about how Ray and I were doing. When I gave her my usual complaints about his work schedule and emotional distance, she listened quietly but didn't offer the sympathy I expected from a concerned mother-in-law. The tension at home intensified after Ray's restaurant discovery. He'd attempt conversations about our relationship, asking what I needed from him, how we could improve our connection. These discussions frustrated me because they felt like too little, too late. I'd respond with tears and accusations, explaining that his sudden interest in our marriage only proved how long he'd been neglecting it. I told him he was gaslighting me, making me question my own experiences of loneliness and abandonment. Emma and James started repeating my words to their father in ways that made me uncomfortable. Emma told Ray that Mommy said Daddy doesn't love her anymore, that Mommy was trying to save our family, but Daddy was too busy with work to care. James asked his father why he made Mommy cry so much, why he couldn't just love her the way she deserved. Hearing my frustrations reflected through my children's voices should have alarmed me, but instead I felt validated that even they could see the problems in our marriage. My expensive purchases became harder to hide: premium gym memberships, designer, workout clothes, frequent restaurant meals, new jewelry that I claimed was treating myself after years of self-neglect. When Ray questioned these expenses, I accused him of trying to control me financially after years of emotional control through neglect. The breaking point came when Ray sat me down one evening, his usual scattered energy replaced by an unsettling calm. He told me he'd hired an attorney and had been documenting our interactions for months. The man I'd dismissed as passive and inattentive had apparently been building a comprehensive record of everything I'd said and done. The evidence Ray presented felt like watching my life through someone else's eyes, and that someone had been paying much closer attention than I'd realized. His attorney's office felt sterile and intimidating as they laid out months of documentation that painted a picture I barely recognized as my own behavior. The recordings were the most shocking. Ray had been capturing our conversations for months, including my phone calls with Sarah and Michelle, where I discussed my relationship with Devon in detail. My own voice played back my justifications, my complaints, my casual dismissal of my marriage vows. Hearing myself describe Ray as emotionally abusive while simultaneously planning romantic dinners with another man created a cognitive dissonance that made me physically nauseous. The financial evidence was equally damaging. Robert, Ray's father, had conducted a forensic accounting of our expenses that revealed a pattern of deception I hadn't even realized I was creating. Premium restaurant charges during claimed work meetings, hotel bookings during supposed gym sessions, expensive gifts to myself that I'd justified as necessary self-care. The numbers told a story of systematic betrayal that couldn't be explained away by marital neglect. Phone records showed constant communication with Devon during family time, work hours, even late at night when I was supposedly sleeping next to my husband. Text messages I'd deleted were somehow recovered, displaying a level of intimacy and planning that contradicted every explanation I'd given for my extended absences. Pastor Kim's session notes provided the most damning evidence of all: my own admissions during counseling, my contradictory statements about wanting to save my marriage while actively pursuing another relationship, my use of therapy as a platform for building my victim narrative rather than genuine reconciliation efforts. The pastor had documented my manipulation attempts with clinical precision. I tried every tactic I'd used successfully before: tears, accusations of vindictiveness, promises to end my relationship with Devon immediately, claims that Ray was being unnecessarily cruel. Nothing worked against the wall of evidence they'd constructed. My emotional manipulation techniques, so effective with friends and family, felt powerless against legal documentation and recorded conversations. Sarah appeared at the attorney's office that afternoon, having been contacted by Ray's legal team. She sat across from me with tears in her eyes, apologizing for enabling my behavior, admitting she'd had no idea how extensive my deception had become. The sister who'd supported my complaints about Ray now looked at me like I was a stranger. Ray announced he'd be serving divorce papers at my upcoming birthday party, ensuring the same friends who'd heard my restaurant joke would witness the consequences of that laughter. The birthday party I'd been planning for weeks became the stage for my complete humiliation. I'd invited everyone who mattered: our friends, both families, colleagues who'd listened to my complaints about Ray. The restaurant was decorated perfectly, the cake was beautiful, and I felt confident surrounded by people who'd supported me through my marriage struggles. Ray arrived later than expected, carrying an envelope and his phone. He asked for everyone's attention, explaining that he had something important to share about our marriage. I assumed he was finally going to apologize publicly, maybe announce his commitment to changing his priorities. Instead, he played that recording from months earlier, my own voice joking about needing a calculator for my body count, followed by the laughter from our friends who'd encouraged my complaints about him. The silence that followed was deafening. These same friends who'd nodded sympathetically at my marriage grievances now stared at me with shock and disgust. Ray handed me the divorce papers in front of everyone, then distributed evidence packets to each family member, showing the financial infidelity, documented lies, and manipulation of our children. Devon had been invited to the party as my guest, but he disappeared when the recording started playing. The man who'd made me feel so special and valued couldn't face the consequences of our relationship when it was exposed publicly. His absence felt like another betrayal, proof that what we'd shared was as shallow as Ray's evidence suggested. Sarah stood up during the presentation, walking over to Ray to apologize for believing my version of events. Michelle sat frozen, later admitting she'd known about my affair, but had trusted my narrative about being trapped in a loveless marriage. Pastor Kim validated every piece of evidence as accurate, confirming that my counseling sessions had revealed patterns of manipulation rather than genuine efforts at reconciliation. The legal papers detailed asset protection Ray had secured, custody, arrangements that favored him based on documented moral fitness concerns, and financial consequences I hadn't anticipated. His methodical documentation had protected our children and our marital assets while exposing every lie I'd told to justify my behavior. Linda embraced Ray in front of everyone, tears streaming down her face as she apologized for not seeing through my manipulation sooner. Our friends left without saying goodbye to me. The children witnessed their mother's public disgrace, understanding for the first time that the family problems they'd heard about had been caused by my choices, not their father's neglect. I sat alone at my birthday party, surrounded by empty chairs, and evidence of the destruction I'd caused while believing I was the victim. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city are you watching.